All right. Well, again, on behalf of Lutheran Summer Music, welcome to this webinar called Remember Well the Future, Preparing a New Generation of Church Musicians, which is a moderated conversation between the LSM church music faculty and 5 of our very wonderful alumni from LSM. For starters, my name is Chad Fothergill. I serve as LSM cantor. I teach organ and church music at LSM. Was a student back in 2000 with with my co-moderator, Laura, who I'll introduce in a moment. We've had the pleasure of getting to know some of our panelists, both as teachers and then, as colleagues and friends as well. So we're really excited to welcome you all to tonight's conversation. Just a couple of notes before we get started. If at any time you have a question that you want to ask a panelist or follow-up question, feel free to drop it into the Q&A function that you see on your screen. Or if you're joining us on Facebook, try to drop it in the Facebook comments or chat. We'll try to be monitoring both at the same time. We'll try to answer as many questions as we can, or maybe if there are several questions kind of along the same vein, try to merge them together a little bit. The other thing to mention at the start is that we might be using a few acronyms tonight. So just if you're joining from maybe beyond the Lutheran Summer Music community or beyond even Lutheran circles, you might hear us refer to LSM, which means the Lutheran Summer Music Academy and Festival. You might hear us refer to the ELCA, which is the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. You might also hear us refer to the LCMS, which is the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. And sometimes we might actually talk about some of those denominations' particular resources. So you may hear us refer to ELW, which is Evangelical Lutheran Worship, the Cranberry Book, or Lutheran Service Book, which is often used by the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. Comes actually in a few different colors, I think. So I've got the burgundy version, I think. I don't know. Any rate, if you hear us use those acronyms at any time, that's what we're referring to. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce everyone who's here. And when I introduce you, just go ahead and wave a little bit. So first off, my co-moderator, Laura, who is a fellow LSM 2000 classmate. We were both in the same organ studio many years ago, and who now serves as associate cantor at Lutheran Summer Music. Laura is a graduate of Valparaiso University and spent several years, I guess is the right word, in France. I hope I'm saying that right.
7 years.
7. Did both education and sort of practical experience there. Now maintains a private voice and keyboard studio in the Twin Cities and has served as a church musician for a variety of denominations. So welcome, Laura. Jordan, there you are, is currently enrolled in the Director of Parish Music program at Concordia University, Chicago, where he also studies composition, organ, and French horn. Is that okay? Yeah, I'm trying to do this by memory, so just shout if I get something wrong. Gwen is a sophomore at Wartburg College, where she is studying music and religion. She's also taking organ lessons and serves a United Methodist congregation in the general Waverly, Iowa area. Fernanda is currently the music director, church musician at United Methodist congregation in Livermore, California, is a graduate of Concordia University, Irvine, and studied both church in both viola and performance.
Viola, performance, and music education.
Thank you. Oh, education. Thank you.
It's a mouthful.
And was very involved in church music and handbells there. Emily is a graduate of Gustavus Adolphus College and is currently pursuing a master's degree in piano performance and pedagogy at the University of Oklahoma in Norman, Oklahoma. And she also teaches piano, and she plays organ for a Presbyterian and UCC congregation in Norman. Welcome, Emily. And Luigi, there you are, graduated from Luther College and is currently Associate Director for Choirs at Iowa City West High School. And in addition to that is also the music ministry coordinator at St. Thomas More Catholic Church in Coralville, Iowa, just to the west of Iowa City. They're kind of merged together there, and has also served as a church musician in various locations throughout Eastern Iowa, and sings professionally in several professional vocal ensembles in the area. So we have, I think among us, about 16 collective summers at LSM. And as you heard in that, we have a variety of proficiencies, interests, sort of background served, backgrounds that we all come from, Lutheran and beyond Lutheran, and which is basically kind of a microcosm of what happens at LSM in sort of the 40 to 45 services that happen every summer. We have all sorts of different worship leaders from different backgrounds that all come together to do and lead and sort of immerse ourselves in church music. So thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us from wherever you are. So just a comment that sort of leads us into our first question for our group. The idea for this seminar came about in part because it seems very easy for church leaders, pastors and musicians alike, to make claims about things like worship styles or the future of the church and what's going to happen, often through the lens of young people. You know, we often hear young people want, you know, insert thing here, you know, as if everyone wants the same thing. but we sort of wanted to unpack this a little bit and put this question to you first. So I guess that's a way of asking, what are the pulls or draws that have led you into studying or sort of doing church music? And you know, if you don't want to answer that part, like what do you see as the role of church liturgy and music in your life? So anyone who's brave enough to go first, go for it.
I can go.
Okay, thanks, Emily.
Well, I grew up in a Lutheran church. My dad was an ELCA pastor. And so I was firmly planted in the Lutheran tradition, and I began playing for my church as a small rural church at a very young age, kind of middle school, since there weren't any other musicians available. And so for me growing up, church has always been a place of community. It's the people who raised me, and I feel like that has progressed and been a part of my experience throughout my time working in churches, but it has been a way for me to connect with other people, connect through music, connect with God, and connect with traditions that are larger than myself. And I think that's what I seek out of church, is that connection to something larger than me as an individual. So that's my experience.
I would say the same experience. I was raised Catholic, and now I work at a Catholic church. But certainly when I was born in the Philippines, I remember going to sunrise masses and singing in the choir. And I remember being like, when we moved here to the States, like being the only like junior high kid in the adult choir. and definitely, like Emily said, you know, we crave a place to belong, right? A place to connect with people, and music has served that for me as well in my experiences in the Catholic Church, in the many churches that I've served when I was in college, and you know, after I graduated from school also. So having that place to call home in many ways, right? I remember I go home to my home church in Wisconsin every time I'm there for the holidays. It's because the people that I grew up with are there. People that I played sports with or and went to school with are there, and we get to meet up at church and be in community with each other. So.
Yeah, for me, the church growing up was largely a place of mentorship. It's where I saw the people who had the similar interests to me. I started playing piano at a very young age, and that didn't ultimately become my, main instrument, if you will, at least not so far. But that's where I got to see and hear piano played at a high level, or you got introduced to organ music and handbells and all that kind of stuff. And so I got to see people, who were, many years ahead of me in their musical practice on a regular basis. And that was incredibly valuable for me as a musician, and also just as a child growing up, having that sense of community and knowing that my interest could carry well into adulthood and beyond. And ultimately it has become my career, which I wasn't expecting, but that's how it turned out. So I'm not too surprised, but I'm very glad that was there for me growing up and continues to be there for me as I begin my career.
For me, the church has always kind of felt like a home to me. I know that's kind of like what everyone else is saying, but it's really a really important thing, I think, for our generation to feel at home in the church. But yeah, I remember the first service I ever played in a church. I was in 8th grade, and it was one of the midweek Lent services at noon. I had to duck out of school for an hour to play it. But I remember from that service, the congregation was always pushing me to explore that more and to do better in that. Not like they're, pressuring me into do church music or anything. But the fact that my church family was really interested to see how I could grow and what more I could do to further the kingdom of God, that really that's what started my whole church music experience.
Yeah, much like other people here, I grew up in a church, attending church every Sunday. I also grew up close to the community of Holden Village in Washington State. And many people know it as a place where a very eclectic group of musicians gets together occasionally, just an eclectic group of church people in general, I would say. And so that definitely, I think, had an influence on my musical growing up. But I think one thing that really drew me into church music was when I realized how much the choice of music can diversify the liturgy. I mean, you have words that are spoken week after week, but some days I want to come to church and scream Kyrie eleison, and some days I want to come to church and whisper it, and the liturgy provides for both. And once I learned that those decisions can be intentional for when each is used, I was fully hooked, and the rabbit hole just gets deeper and deeper, and I love it.
I kind of want to pick up on something that Jordan mentioned. So I know that there are probably a lot of, as we would say, maybe career church musicians joining us, or people who do this as kind of a primary vocation, and not all, but and I know that a lot are wondering how they might engage a young person who has musical gifts or leadership gifts, either as a musician or pastor or other sort of interested person in the leadership of worship. And I'm just wondering if any of you have stories like what Jordan mentioned, where you were really encouraged by your congregation, or want to say something to that effect that sort of helps people hear how maybe important that is, or what you notice or experience through that. Fernanda?
I have something on that. I think the most important thing is when those gifts are recognized in children and teens, and really anyone, is to really meet that person where they are. Like I talked about, I had a lot of great mentorship growing up, but the thing that was really important to me was that those people saw me as a person first who was interested in music, and I wasn't pushed from like 10 years old or whatever to become a church musician. That was never the expectation. They nurtured the gift, they gave me gifts, they gave me opportunities to use them, to talk about them, but it wasn't, those relationships were formed on a human level first and not as, you know, trying to push me into the career. That career kind of organically grew on its own. And I think it would have been very different if those relationships had been formed with the expectation that I become like them.
If I could just build off that for a second. So like with those expectations, I know a lot of people, especially when they're teenagers, they tend to resent expectations that the adults or society in general would put in place for them. So again, I think that's a big part of what my congregation didn't do, and something they did well, because they didn't really expect me to go into church music. They just said, you could be good at this, why don't you pursue it a little bit more and see where it leads? Because at the end of the day, it's up to God to decide where we'll end up and how we'll serve him. So to not have the congregation trying to push us in a direction that we do or don't like, I think it's the freedom to explore it at our own terms is a major benefit to us.
Yeah, for me personally, I took piano lessons until I was 15, and I had burned out by 15, and I stopped taking lessons, and those people were still there for me. You know, they still loved me, they still talked to me and encouraged me in other musical ways, you know, and so that, you know, those relationships didn't hinge on what I did. And ultimately I found my way back, but I didn't find my way back until college, you know, so human relationships first.
Yeah, building off of what they said, I think once those relationships are established, something that I really benefited from was when church musicians that I knew would set forward a challenge for me. And when they would say, you know, I know you're capable of this, so, you know, demonstrate that for me. Like, this is something that I know you can do. And so I absolutely want to see you do it. And that's something that, you know, brings me joy. And that I really responded to as a young person. I remember being in elementary choir, and my church choir director said to me, here, we're singing this hymn, we're introducing our kids choir to Children of the Heavenly Father. I want you to see if you can sing the alto part, and I'll never play it for you. And I still, I mean, by heart, you know, we sang it so many times, and I spent so much time trying to figure it out and remembering, if she just played it once for me, this would not be hard. Yet instead, she chose to give me the skills that then I could apply to every other hymn we sang, and be able to pick up on the alto part quickly. And so I think recognizing that what people are capable of and allowing them to grow those tools within themselves, rather than saying, hey, it'd be really cool if you sang this alto part, let me teach it to you. Giving me the tools to teach it to myself was something that was really impactful for me.
I like that. So the sort of throwing into the deep end, as it were, which I would say I know that is reminiscent of my experience, where all of a sudden there was not an organist available, and it's like, hey, you can press keys, will you please do this? And that's how it all started. Yeah, well, I kind of want to pull out a thread here that was mentioned about just that the draw is or the interest is this just sense of community that sort of evolves or is present or is sort of there in this sort of communal music making environment. There's a lot of energy invested right now, I would say, in Laura, if you want to kind of affirm this or push back on it a little bit, you know, in our generation, or maybe older, about putting these experiences into boxes with certain labels like traditional or contemporary or blended or authentic. And there's a lot of energy invested in sort of making those boxes, it seems to me at least, and trying to package or market worship or faith within those parameters. And I just want to ask or kind of wonder aloud, what do you make of those words? Are they really as important, either for you personally or people that you're talking with, or are there just sort of other things at play that maybe those sorts of conversations are missing? big question, sorry. Take whatever you tack what you want with that.
I think the categories themselves of traditional or contemporary, they help in a way to categorize music, maybe, but I think many churches do a disservice to labels such services as traditional or contemporary. I work at a Catholic church that does a lot of contemporary music, and actually, being a younger person, I was experiencing a lot of new music being told to me, because I sang a lot more traditional hymns. We did a lot more of that style of music. But for me, I think it's actually the treatment of the music that matters more than the label itself. Like last weekend we did Hallelujah, Sing to Jesus. Maybe a more traditional hymn, but we added a little guitar and we added a little drum or something to switch it up, and people afterwards didn't even recognize that it was a more traditional hymn. So I think we do, in my experience, it puts labels on things, like this is a contemporary song, this is a traditional song, but I think it does a disservice to churches to label it as such. I think whatever the music is, let's treat it in the way that is beautiful and that is interesting and allows for people to experience something different. I think everybody's saying that as well. That what Gwen was saying, some days I want to scream the Kyrie, and some days I want to be in reverence with the text. And I think if we treat it as such, I think it could allow for more differentiation in things as well. So
I agree with what Luigi just said. And I think in asking the question, like, what is tradition? I think it's more important to ask, like, whose tradition is it? Because for some people, tradition might be contemporary music, or, and I think we need to think about those words and think about people's individual experiences, because people are going to experience those words in different ways. Someone's sense of authentic music will be different than another person. So I think our generation is really good at seeing specific examples, and I think we think more individualistically than maybe older generations think more as a community. And so I think we see those words and understand those words in a different way. And I think we may see them more individualistically, where we see people's experiences of those words, if that makes sense.
One thing that I've noticed with the labeling of services as traditional and contemporary music in general is the way that it just really pits the two against each other. And I'm not really a fan of that, because, I've been to some churches where contemporary is them projecting Marty Haugen's sheet music on the screen, and there's others, where contemporary music is something you hear on Christian radio. And so I think even the fact that the church itself really can't agree on what fits in each category kind of speaks for itself as to how the labels are functioning, as terms that are, saying, okay, this is going to be who's at this service and this is going to be who's here. And then churches love to use that to compare attendance and to compare, how much offering is coming in at our traditional versus our contemporary service. And I think from a lot of people that I at least have talked to, they really don't want contemporary music or music that they call like of this age or of our generation to be overshadowing or replacing, that is traditional. I think generally our generation just wants our distinct place in the song, and that's, it's hard when it feels like, the two are always right up against each other because of these labels and boxes that have been created for them.
Yeah, and you can see the disparities of like the traditional. Definitely the older. I've played in churches where it's been labeled as such. It's earlier in the day at 8 a.m. the traditional, and then at 11 o'clock the rock. The band comes and all of that, and definitely the younger generation, whatever you want to say, comes to that service. And so it's visible too, more than just the labeling of the music itself also.
I think a lot of churchgoers and church leaders even too often make the mistake, perhaps subconsciously, of conflating musical era with genre. So I was talking this morning to another church musician about, how we have this idea of traditional music, but that traditional style music, there's fantastic things being written, new hymns, new choral anthems, new organ music, whatever, being written every day, and then there's some of the things that we think of as, modern music that's 30, 40 years old, so to not conflate, modern, up to date in all those sort of terms with something that is necessarily contemporary, like, today or like the last few years or whatever, if that makes sense. So I think that if we have to be careful to not, make those boxes either, conflating things that are not necessarily the same, celebrating the new music written in a traditional style, and, kind of building, the tradition of some of those songs that were contemporary at one point that have now become staples in certain people's traditions.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if we can, this idea of, Emily, I think you mentioned it, authenticity, and sort of that in terms of a sense of community, a community that gathers and worships in whatever style. I feel like authenticity has become one of those sort of boxes that you've mentioned a little bit, or one of those niche areas. Does anyone want to try to venture a definition or thought about what authenticity means, either to you or to people you've talked about or worshiped with? It's a very unscripted question.
I think authentic is one of those words that has the definition kind of, or the application of it, I guess, varies heavily from person to person, like, yes, we want to be authentic, but authentic to whom? People have so many different experiences in life, and that's kind of getting back to this idea of, trying to box together entire groups of people, entire generations from, across the country and different cultures and whatnot, and you can't do that.
Yeah, as I was sort of saying it and then thinking about it and the silence, just how bad of a question it was too, just looking for these boxed answers to really nuanced topics. I kind of want to pull in one of the questions that we've received already in the Q&A. A pastor is asking, kind of looking at a transition moment in their particular congregation. Any pointers, kind of getting out of the philosophical a little bit and looking at sort of practical things, any pointers on networking among younger musicians in search of a singing congregation? Any thoughts about what encourages that, or helps nurture that sense of a new generation or younger generation of leadership?
I think when you're trying to invite young people into the church, it's helpful to let them see their role and help them to see that they're wanted and needed. I think it goes back to this sense of belonging. If you're belonging, that means that you have a role to play and that you are not just a number, but you being there actually makes a difference. You as an individual makes a difference. And I think if people are able to show that through their actions, not just words, when you go into a choir or such, I think that's huge. And young people will talk to their friends and say, oh, this was such a great director, this was such a great choir. And we'll talk, and then that church, that congregation will be known for really respecting the individual and for wanting people and wanting them for who they are, not just as a voice, but as a person. And I think that means a lot too. At least that means a lot to me.
I'm also reading this question in another layer in terms of if this church were to be searching for a future staff member, having their music ministers retire, looking for what the next generation of the leadership might be in their church, where would they network to find? Where would they network to be looking for people who might want this position, who might want this job?
I can talk about that a little bit. I think social media is going to be a really powerful tool in the future. Like, obviously right now we've got this whole idea of it just being kind of like a fun little thing you do to communicate with your friends and post pictures of your dinner. But really all of us, especially the younger generations, we're all on social media. You know, we all have Facebook and Instagram. And so I think we could really utilize that to find the younger people, because like I'm a member of about 5 different church music groups on Facebook. So just kind of utilizing those routes that may not be super comfortable or familiar to older generations could be really helpful. Because like I said before, that's where we are. That's how you find us. That's how you contact us.
And I would add to that, since I know that person is actually in the Twin Cities area, and so am I, there is a whole Facebook group for Minneapolis St. Paul church gig postings that gets a lot of activity. So that's something to look into.
Going along with the idea of social media, and this might broaden a little bit beyond just, seeking to draw in younger church musicians in particular, but websites, church websites. I don't know if everyone else here vets them as heavily as I do before I attend for anything. I think every time I see something about music on a church website, it really speaks to me, because it tells me first and foremost that music is such an intentional thing for this congregation, that they've sat down to think, how can we invite people in with our music? That the fact that they've even asked that question at all on a congregational level really, really speaks to the congregation. And so I think, having that be a piece of, how do we worship? What do we believe? How do we practice? And having that along with statements about that, along with statements about the worship in general, are really, really huge draws for me.
Yeah, these things are all really important, and definitely, I mean, as someone who is job hunting, relatively recently, I combing all the websites and all that social media and whatnot was very helpful. But it's also important not to discount word of mouth either, kind of, more old-fashioned networking. I got my church job through a mutual friend. So, if that's a really important way. I mean, like in the Twin Cities, I'm hearing that there is a church music, Facebook group or whatever, but, not discounting the people that may be right there in the community that you don't know about, or they don't even know that that's in store for them, is really important as well.
Yeah, when I was living in Iowa City, I actually stumbled into my first church position by playing for a wedding, and the director of music was there helping coordinate things, and came up afterwards and said, hey, we have an internship opening, which ended up leading to other things. So it's sort of, in a sense, you do the word of mouth, the network, and sort of the stumbling into things, which I suppose sort of is tilting us a little bit toward career / occupation / vocation of the church musician. And one thing that Laura and I have talked about in our experiences is that we graduated from college around the same time that, these 2 books, ELW and LSB, both published in 2006, were being released and becoming a part of sort of the community congregational musical fabric. And one thing that we sort of have noticed or talked about is that these books make sort of musical demands of the musicians. So for instance, I went into a position in 2009 wishing that I would have been required to take a guitar and percussion techniques class other than just sort of keyboard lessons, because there's repertoire in the book and repertoire in the community, repertoire just all around that sort of begs different skills of us. And I think a lot of church musicians who end up in positions where they have to steward or work with a board that governs, say, a fine art series, with maybe wishes that they would have taken a finance class. And I think all church musicians today wish they would have taken a audio video editing class. We just have to do that. So I kind of getting into that more occupational silo, as it were. Have any of you noticed discrepancies between what you're being asked to do in positions, or what you might be asked to do in positions, versus your actual training? Like what your expectations were versus what's being expected of you, that would be helpful for our audience to maybe think about or hear?
Just going along with that, kind of the technical training. So when I first stepped into this position, I was definitely like, yes, I will prepare the choirs and I will lead them in practices, and we'll sing in the services on the weekends and weekly rehearsals. And then and COVID happened, and just like this feeling of like every time like something happens in mass where a microphone goes awry or like a soundboard thing happens, they just look at me and think that it's something that I can just touch the button, there's definitely more, like I've now installed, we've now installed cameras, recording devices, soundboards, things that I didn't necessarily get a training in, or like we do outdoor masses, and so getting a transmitter and hooking it up to a sound system to transport to cars is just not something that they teach you. Or when they ask you how much voltage something is, are there plugins outside that we can, so you kind of become the music, and then also everything that deals, because we use music in mass, now you you are now our go-to person. And so there's been lots of that. And then also like just personally, like, and maybe like as a teacher too, like I just didn't spend so much time talking to adults. It's like, like maybe I talk to a lot of young people, but sometimes I just don't get practice in talking to older people than me. And so the way I communicate my skill sets, sometimes like I don't even know how like I would get experience in that, but like I just wish in the past few years in my student teaching experiences that in like as a teacher, I wish I just had gotten more time talking to adults, because problems come up and then you freak out, and and then just like that relational thing, that just had a little bit of like dissonance in my relationship talking with people. And so
I think the most beneficial piece of information that I got in college, and again, I didn't do a church music degree, so I don't know what the program exactly looked like at my university for students who did that. But I remember one day one professor, announcing to whatever large class I was in, said something along the lines of, the successful musicians are the ones who are versatile, the ones who say, yes, I am willing to learn that or willing to work on that, and not the people who necessarily box themselves in most of the time. So I think that was actually the most valuable thing for me, because it taught me that I was going to have to learn new things on the job as well as in school. And many of the things that I do for my church position right now and in other components of my work life are not things that I necessarily learned in college, but I learned how to have that open-mindedness and that, ability to say yes to learning new things, even if they freaked me out or whatever. So that has been incredibly helpful.
As a keyboardist, I feel like I was given a lot of tools in my undergraduate degree to be able to play. And I feel like I was pretty well prepared going into my job just because I had a lot of church experience. But what I think what churches need to do is give furthering educational funds for once we get on the job, oh shoot, I don't know how to do this, and providing us the opportunities to learn it, such as like piano maintenance or organ maintenance. I have no idea what that is. And I didn't really need to know until this point. And that's where I think the church can support its musicians in saying, if you don't know this thing about that's specific to the job, here's the funds to go learn it, or go to this conference and attend that. And I think that's where churches can support the musicians, because I don't think it's the job of institutions necessarily to always train every detail, but it's to give us the tools. And then it's the job then to give us the specific, requirements, and to give us the help we need for on the job training, I guess. So that's my one input I would give.
Well, I think that gets into kind of another aspect of what we sort of wanted to maybe talk about here was, for a long time, and I think, I'll speak for myself, and in that, there was a sense of going through college or graduating from college, and the fact that college set you up for everything, and you could be part of different organizations that would sort of nurture and support that. But I think more and more we're seeing very fast-paced changes in the college, university, and seminary systems, where I just wonder if those institutions or organizations might actually become more important in our career path or lifetime. So kind of one question that we were sort of wondering about is, are any of you members of professional organizations? And if so, what do they provide for you, or what maybe do you seek more? What types of things might you seek from them? If that makes sense.
I am a part of different organizations through both organ and piano. And for me, it's all about networking and building relationships, which has been huge for my development, and to gain those mentors, those people who have gone through what I'm going through right now, and to tell me everything, all the mistakes they made, and tell me them now so I can avoid them. So that's been huge. And then just, I think, further education. I've found some of the conventions to be quite helpful, and more so for like local organizations to get to know what churches are out there, and what church musicians are in the area.
Emily, which professional organizations, if you don't mind sharing that, do you belong to?
Sure. Like AGO, and then the local Twin Cities when I was back in St. Paul, and then for piano, just the teachers associations and local associations for MMTA and MTNA.
I'm a member of the Handbell Musicians of America. That's the only organization I'm officially part of right now. And they have been incredibly helpful with, the networking and that sort of thing. I also appreciate the work of social media as well, not an official organization, but there's some really helpful directors groups and piano teachers groups and whatnot, and places that I can go and say, oh, I had this problem in rehearsal and I don't know how to help this person. What do I do? And I will get 50 comments of, ways to explain it or drills to do or whatever. And I can take that back and use that in my rehearsals. And oftentimes those are people who are leaders in that organization or other church music organizations. So it's really great that they're able to connect with people both in and out of the official membership.
Yeah, like you said, I'm also a part of a lot of social media stuff for church musicians. But one thing I've noticed is just the amount of diversity we get in those groups on social media. Like, whereas different, like the AGO, the American Guild of Organists, it's primarily for organists, right? Because, it's in the name. But on these Facebook groups and all these other different groups, we have not just organists, but also contemporary church musicians and church choir directors and handbell directors. And so just having those different perspectives, I feel like lends a lot to us, because we can, it helps us to view different issues in the church from a different perspective, and how these things, how policies we might want to enact could impact different groups in the church and different people. And so I think it really helps us truly better understand the situation of church music as a whole.
Do you think there's something that these organizations, whatever they are, be they American Guild of Organists, AGO, Association of Lutheran Church Musicians, ALCM, Presbyterian Association of Musicians, PAM, I could run out the rest of the time with the alphabet soup. Are there things that they can offer that are really helpful in sort of from your perspective that might not be happening necessarily in like the college degree programs or seminaries or other places?
Personally, my limited experience post-college with trying to find continuing education through handbells, at least. And I mean, I'm sure there's handbell people watching this, so if I'm missing something, please let me know. Is that I find that there's opportunities for, and this is a very handbell thing, but there's opportunities for people who are kind of coming into the directing, leadership position, as a ringer, or like, teaching opportunities for people who are really experienced. I've had a difficult time finding things for people with college music degrees, but not a lot of professional experience. So, I understand the conducting patterns and I understand these basic things, but I need help running a rehearsal or conducting in ways that are really specific to handbells with the background that I do have and things like that. So I feel like there's kind of that gap in educational opportunity, and that is what's been most difficult for me, at least. So I'm not completely sure what's out there, but I would like to see more of that, or at least have it more publicized if it is there.
One thing that I think is really wonderful, I think it was in the Minnesota Music Teachers Association, back when I was in Minnesota, they had a mentorship program and it's totally free, where you would just be paired up with an experienced person. And I don't know if the AGO has this, but I think that's like an invaluable resource, is if you can pair young people up with professionals in the field. I think that is just huge. And it can also help younger musicians know what questions to ask, because sometimes we don't even know where to look or what to, expand upon, because everything's so new. So I think mentorship programs could be really useful in different organizations. Again, I don't know if they exist in every organization we've talked about, but.
Yeah, part of my education requirements for the parish music program here at Concordia is that we actually do a sort of internship with a professional church musician somewhere in the area. So like we'll go to all the evening rehearsals, like choir and hymnals and stuff, and we'll kind of assist them there. And then we'll also attend church services with them from more of a professional perspective, so we can really, like you said, have that mentor and have that invaluable experience.
And two, I was just going to add, I mean, I think what we're doing right now also is really a wonderful, I mean, just young people chatting with other young people about our own struggles too, and the things that we have yet to learn, right? And kind of that collective unknown is you know, even though we're far apart from each other and other in various locations, various churches around the country, that we still share this same kind of, and that to know that other people that my age are also in that same boat, and to have discussions about it, I think is also invaluable to partake in. And I'm not saying that like I have to be the one to be asked all the time about young people in church, but I've not seen anything really on a webinar on young people and how we can move the church forward, and to have discussions about, and maybe I've just not searched the right things, but I think having conversations like this is also invaluable. So.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we wanted to gather you, is because I don't know about you, Laura, but I feel like a lot of times I just hear young people want, and well, have you asked them, you know, are they at the table in the conversation? And so this has been really yeah, I agree. I just think that they're just, Laura, maybe you can say this better than I can, but we just sense that you live in a more nuanced approach and setting to things than what has existed in the current training and the way that positions are sort of described or structured. And we're not really hearing those voices in a way that has brought clarity to the way that, especially post-pandemic, things will look in a lot of places. There's going to be a lot of change or restructuring for various reasons. And so, you know, I hope that conversations like this would continue as well. One thing that sort of came up in this last question that might get us in, I guess, maybe into our even last question, since we're coming up on an hour here. We've been asking the questions, so we kind of want to reverse the tables a little bit and put it to you. What haven't we asked that might be on your minds, or what would you want to share to a wider for a wider audience that might be listening about your experiences or perspectives of you know, what this sort of career or vocation or work looks like to you, you know, burning questions in your own mind, and anything that you'd like to ask us or the audience listening. Not to put you all on the spot.
Maybe not necessarily a question, but more of a comment about, I think maybe to reflect on what everyone is saying about finding home in church and finding a place in the music in the church. I think outside of church, there's already like so much like competition filled or perfection filled things, if that sort of makes sense, that I think in terms of music, I don't know how to say this, but like the perfectionism that comes with music maybe should be just reconsidered in church, and that like how beautiful it is that people just want to sing in general. I'm not saying that auditioned things can't happen in church, or beautiful music should be sacrificed in church, but I think in this way of people yearn to participate in music, and I think people want to be in music whether they think they're good or not, but somebody has previously told them that they can't do it, or has been cast aside because they were the 10th member of something and they only needed 9 people or something. And so I think if we can encourage I'm finding that in my own position too, like the balance of who can sing in the choir is, and what time do we take to invest in those that maybe aren't as good vocal, that are still developing. How can we still build them up? How can we still encourage them to participate in liturgy and be in music and ask them to do these special things without deterring their just love for music in general? So I don't know if that's not necessarily a question, but how can we as a group of people that love music also share that with each other while removing I don't know, even competition is the right word, the perfectionist things that we put on ourselves or put on our groups and things. I don't know if that makes sense, but
or like how do we avoid gatekeeping church music?
Yeah, like if my gosh, it's church. It let us, so I think that's a thing that I have been struggling with this year, or just things that always come up to me, is who can participate in our music programs. Also a teacher, who can participate in our church music programs. What is that thing that cuts them off, and should we? And so if we want this to be a thing that finds place, if we want people to find a place in church, and it's music, so.
And that conversation that will be especially important, as we come out of the pandemic. I'm sure churches are in various stages of reopening, for in-person. Mine's still closed, but, people are really yearning for that connection and that belonging in a group, physical belonging that they haven't had for, a year. So we really need to find ways to get people participating.
And I think you both ended up unwittingly speaking to one of our questions here. How can this emerging generation of young people move the church forward musically and in general? And I think you both just hit it right on the head.
Yeah, and I just think too, this notion of, I've written elsewhere that, these past several years of celebrity musical culture like American Idol, I have people come up to me and ask, well, I don't sound like the people on TV, so I don't think I can join the choir. You've got that, and all of this sort of, the customized playlists and the earbuds all the time, like the technology and digital availability of sound and the way sound works and commercialized production has just really changed a lot of perceptions about what communal music making is. And so we're in sort of a point where both in a generational sort of leadership way, and just in terms of approaching this and not making it about musical perfection, but making it about what you all said at the very beginning, community. There's just so many ways forward that we can have better conversations with our communities and doing this. There's one other question, if you all want to stick with us for a few more seconds here. There's one more question that was sort of on our list, but we didn't really quite get to, but someone has brought it up in the Q&A, and I'm just going to read it verbatim here. So we have the question: my generation of sacred music students was not trained how to do our jobs part-time or bivocationally, and fostered in us a belief that we would all be employed full-time, which I understand that and resonate with that. So how has this changed for your generation? What advice can you give to your colleagues who give so much of themselves but are stretched too thin? Discuss.
That's interesting to me that there was a general expectation of full-time work, because I never had that. I didn't know that full-time church work existed until I went to college. So that is definitely, at least among the people I know, not the expectation at all anymore. And I consider myself very lucky that I only have to work 2 jobs. So I have my teaching studio and I have church. So that component has definitely changed. But in terms of not stretching myself too thin, I'm very fortunate that I work with a church staff that communicates well about, what needs to be done and what the amount of time and whatnot that each activity takes. And they're very respectful of, how much we are expected to work for what we are paid, and keeping with our whatever contracts or whatever we have signed. So I'm very fortunate to be in that sort of environment.
Yeah, I think for me right now, I never really had the expectation that I would only be doing church music as a profession. Like, as far as I've known, all the church musicians, like a lot of organists and stuff, they also teach at the grade school if the church has one, which is really common in the Lutheran world, especially in the LCMS. But one of my professors, he was telling one of our church music classes, we were discussing something similar to this, and he was telling us about how at one of his first churches, he actually started out playing organ on the weekends, but teaching something like math or science at the school for second grade. And so I think that just kind of goes to show how versatile we need to be, and how our training might not equip us for that. Because, if we're training for church music, that doesn't really prepare you to teach second grade science. Yes, it's a pretty simple class, but again, I haven't done second grade science since second grade. So just thinking about that and keeping that in mind as churches are asking us to do things, like, I'm willing to help out, but it might not be really what they're looking for,
I think also going along with that, generally the idea that like other talents and gifts then need to be encouraged in that setting to help discern what else might I want to be taking on part-time, that goes beyond church music. And I think generally that goes back to the idea of community, getting to know someone really well and offering these ideas because sometimes maybe you do have a little more flexibility to make decisions around what you're doing with the other half of your time, or with things along that line, and not always feeling like you need to be trapped up in this notion of finding full-time church music work because that was where your primary interest lies and that was where your training lied. So generally encouraging of other interests and ways to kind of, come to the table with an eclectic variety of skills to offer, and finding unique ways to use those that hopefully then gets you a good paycheck.
Just reviewing the question. I know we're close on time here. I think for those that are maybe working full time or that are stretching themselves focused on the church work, I think this is a great time to examine collaboration. I've had churches where I played, I didn't play the last weekend of the month, or we were able to find another person to share the duties with me. And so to allow somebody who has different experiences to help in the church as well, I think has been a way or as advice to maybe not be so stretched thin all the time, is to maybe think about how you can split your position in other ways and allow for collaboration to happen. So
if I could talk about that for just a second. So at my church, we don't have a full-time church musician. I'm actually one of 3 organists who regularly plays at our church. And so we're kind of on a rotational schedule. We're, like you said, we're all collaborating together to make sure the congregation has the music to worship every week. But we all come from different walks of life. So we all bring a lot of different things to the worship service. And I feel like, honestly, even though we don't have one full-time church musician, it's really kind of enriched worship a lot. A lot of the congregation members, they say, we really appreciate the diversity because, the old music wasn't bad, but it started to get a little dull because, it's just the same person's perspective over and over again. So, you don't have to have like 3 different organists at one time in your church. But again, just exploring the possibility of collaboration can really enhance the service.
One last question, just to kind of bring it full circle here. I kind of want to affirm what some of you have said, where I grew up in an area where I only saw music as sort of what church music is, what Jordan just described, where if you played the organ, you were part of a rotation, and in my case, I maybe played once or twice a month. And my understanding of a musical vocation was that you could either be a high school band director or choir director. That was it. I didn't know what a DMA or a PhD was when I was in high school. And LSM sort of opened the doors to all of that, and really sort of changed perspective a little bit. Since we're kind of talking about this through the lens of Lutheran summer music, and you've all had that experience, is there a way that the program or a certain experience at LSM maybe changed your thinking about this, or opened sort of a new idea, or encouraged you to do this in a certain way? I think a couple of people have asked that in the Q&A, so just kind of want to throw that out there. Things that might have encouraged you at LSM, and that might be a way to, bring our webinar full circle here.
Absolutely. I think for me, Lutheran summer music was pivotal in my understanding my vocation, because I think I walked into my first summer at LSM having church music as an area of interest for me and as a hobby, and I left a year and a half later with it as a vocational path. And I think just even meeting and having conversations with people who were combining their love of the church and their love of music was so huge for me, because automatically walking in, we were all connected in this way, in this unique kind of odd way from our other peers, and we all understood what it felt like. I think to a certain degree, to feel like you're the only person in your area or one of just a few people that really loved these two things, and we all felt, I think, the pressure from the generations above us to really be engaged in these things. And I think because of that, there was such a bond between, the people that I shared my time at LSM with. And I think it was very helpful. The conversations that I had there in classes and in the worship that we shared together to really, feel a little less alone in all of it, and understand that there were other people that loved all of this stuff too. And it wasn't totally crazy to spend your life doing it. Coming from the Northwest, where it is kind of crazy to work at a church full time, so honestly, LSM is what I have to thank for all of this, for what I'm doing now in the college I'm at, and basically most aspects of my of my life experience at this point.
First of all, I completely agree with Gwen. I think you're right, I think. But also for me, when I was doing the church music class at LSM, one thing that really struck me was just how much variety there really is within church music. Because before that, I had only really been exposed to the Lutheran perspective. Like I was raised in the LCMS church. I was taking lessons from an LCMS church musician, and I was going to an LCMS high school. So that was really the only perspective I had been able to see. But going to LSM, studying with Chad really showed me how much more there is to it and how much more I could do in the field of church music.
Anything else that you want to put out there before we sort of cadence here? As I feel like we've sort of gotten into a rhythm and could go on for a lot longer, but we're also approaching the 75-minute mark here. This, just for those of you watching, this could be the first of a few conversations. We're not sure. There are just so many topics to always be talking about, especially, we really did not address sort of what the pandemic has changed for a lot of us vocationally, so that could also be a topic for someday. But anything else that anyone wants to say or ask?
I just have one comment that occurred to me. You asked what questions we had for you and for the people listening. And I think one question I want to ask is, why do you want young people in your church? Often it's assumed that you want young people, but I think you need to really think about what you want from us. Why do you specifically want us, not just for the future of the church, but for who we are as individuals and what we bring to the church? And so I think that's a good starting point if you're having this good discussion. And that's what I would encourage you all to ask yourselves.
That is a perfect place to stop. It's like a half cadence question mark. I love it. So those of you, yeah, that leaves room for a whole nother discussion or an assignment for homework, like sometimes we have at LSM, but not always. So with that, just noting the time, I will just thank all of you, Fernanda, Emily, Luigi, Gwen, and Jordan. It is so wonderful to see all of you again. Some of us are meeting for the second time, but some of us know each other from LSM, and we're all connected in various ways. And special thanks also to Laura, my colleague at LSM, and yeah, we go way back at LSM, and can also talk about its formative experience. If at any time you want to ask follow-up questions, this may be available later on, but you can look on the LSM website for our contact information and ask any follow-up questions that you have. Thank you again all for joining us, and blessed remaining 50 days of Eastertide to you wherever you are. So thank you all, and good night.